On the second day of questioning for President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, it was a batch of emails that may or may not have been marked committee confidential that briefly stole the show. Here's Mola Lenghi.
Shame on my colleagues if they conceal them now.
A battle over the release of more than 100,000 documents related to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh dominated the first part of Thursday's hearing.
There's no classified documents here.
Do you want to give up your emails right now? Make them public? I don't think you do.
Democrat Cory Booker dared to face disciplinary action from the Senate for publicly releasing material the committee labeled confidential.
I hope that they will bring charges against us, and I'm ready to accept the full responsibility.
Senator Dianne Feinstein questioned Judge Kavanaugh about a previously confidential email he wrote in 2003 while working in the George W. Bush White House. It said, "I'm not sure that all legal scholars refer to Roe as the settled law of the land at the Supreme Court level, since court can always overrule its precedent, and 3 current justices on the court would do so."
This has been viewed as you saying that you don't think Roe is settled.
I'm always concerned with accuracy, and I thought that was not quite accurate description of all legal scholars.
Senators revisited whether Judge Kavanaugh had discussed Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. He said he hasn't.
I've never given anyone any hints, forecasts, previews, winks, nothing.
I don't know whether people understand.
A steady stream of protesters continued to interrupt the proceedings, as they did during the first 2 days. Mola Lenghi, CBS News, the Capitol.
CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. All right, Ed, I want to play a clip for you from Thursday's hearing where Connecticut Democrat Richard Blumenthal gets frustrated asking Judge Kavanaugh about the Mueller probe.
Have you ever talked about the special counsel investigation with Don McGahn, who is behind you, or anyone else in the White House? That's a simple yes or no.
I'm not remembering any discussions like that. Of course, in preparing for this hearing, I've prepared for questions like the one you're asking.
And
so those are moot court sessions where we've.
Well, what discussions have you had about the special counsel with people in the White House?
I've not had discussions. If I'm understanding your question correctly, I haven't had such discussions, but I want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly.
It's pretty simple English. Have you talked about the special counsel with anyone in the White House? Anybody who works for the President of the United States.
Right. You just rephrased the question, though. That was about Mr. Mueller this time, and it previously was about the investigation. But I've had, if I'm understanding the question correctly, no discussions of the kind you're asking.
So you're saying no, you've had no discussions, you haven't talked to anyone in the White House about Robert Mueller or the special counsel investigation.
So you changed the question again, Senator. Of course, I know Mr. Mueller personally from my prior experience I haven't seen him in a long time, but I knew him when we worked together in the Bush administration. So, but I've had no discussions of the kind that I think you're asking about.
Well, I'm asking about the kind you're thinking about, not myself.
Well, I haven't had any discussions of the kind I'm thinking about either. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take that as a no, which you are giving under oath, and we can put aside the humor for the moment.
Right. I'm not trying to be humorous. I'm trying to be accurate. And for example, if someone says your courthouse.
No, I'm talking about discussions with anybody who works for the President of the United States in the White House about the special counsel. And so far, frankly, your answer has been ambiguous.
I don't think it's been ambiguous.
You've dodged the question. You've ducked it. It's the same question again and again and again. And I'm going to move on because I have other ground to cover.
All right. So, Ed, I mean, that was such a lengthy, charged exchange. What's your take on it?
Do you hear that, Elaine? That's hairs splitting
right
all over Washington right now, because that's what this has been. This is like a game of I know what you are, but what am I, or who's on first. Look, Brett Kavanaugh, by all accounts, is on the verge of being confirmed, and all Democrats can do at this point is try and they have tried now for the better part of 2 days in vain, to try to get him to trip up on anything. And look, this is why Supreme Court nominees spend weeks preparing for these kinds of things, why they hold intense day-long murder board sessions with them, rehearsals essentially at the old executive office building next to the White House, because they want to anticipate and physically and mentally prepare him for those kinds of exchanges. In fairness to Kavanaugh, he's right. The question did change there 2 or 3 times. All Blumenthal was trying to do is try to get him to concede that maybe he talked to somebody about the Mueller investigation. I think at one other point in that exchange, he said something like, well, or he said to somebody else, well, it's been in the news. Like, if you read the paper, of course, you're going to hear about it. You're going to talk to people about it. There was a similar exchange last night with the California Senator, Kamala Harris, who tried to figure out who, if anyone, he was talking to about the special counsel investigation.
She asked, though, about the Kasowitz firm.
The firm that represented the president at one time. And he said, look, I can't guarantee you that because simply I just don't know who works there. And you think to yourself, well, you're a federal judge in Washington. You, more than most people, would probably know who works there. But as he clarified later in the day, he realized that there were, in fact, a few people who worked there that he would have known, and didn't, again, give a clear answer on that. But this is what it's been, and this is what it's going to be through the end of today. But the bottom line is, it appears he's safe for now, and this is all Democrats can do to prove to their base of support, to people who are concerned about Kavanaugh being on the court, that they've done everything they possibly could to at least slow this down.
So help us understand this situation regarding documents. Several other documents that were supposedly, quote unquote, committee confidential were released by Democrats Thursday morning, but it turns out, as I understand it, they were actually pre-cleared for public release. Was what we saw then essentially just a bit of political theater? It
was. It definitely was, because in the morning, at least, there was the senators, at least, were leading people to believe that they were releasing this against the will of the Republicans. What was then revealed was that, in fact, Republicans had looked at all these documents and prepared to release them, and they were eventually released. Committee confidential was a term that was attached to thousands of documents related to his work as a White House lawyer back in the day. And essentially what it was is that members of the committee and their staffs could look at them. If there was something that they wanted to bring out into the public sphere, they could do so if they asked permission of Chairman Grassley, who would then have to go back to the Trump and Bush White House staffs and say, you got any issue with any of these? And if not, we'll then release them publicly. And I think what Democrats were concerned about is we essentially have to tip our hand in a bid to sort of catch him in a gotcha, and we don't like that. And this isn't necessarily what has been done in the past with previous nominees. Now, in fairness, previous nominees weren't the White House counsel. And so that's part of why there's been this discrepancy over documents, this disagreement over what exactly could be looked at. Democrats arguing, whether you agree with them or not, that there may be things in there that speak to his thinking on any number of issues that could come before the court. Republicans turn around, as Chuck Grassley said the other day on CBS this morning, it's not applicable to whether or not he'd be a good judge. And that's the argument that they've been having. And in an era when Republicans control the Senate and therefore control the Judiciary Committee and want to see this guy on the bench as quickly as possible, they're basically saying we're going to withhold this stuff and it's not applicable, and you Democrats have to play by the rules.
Well, Ed, you said a moment ago in answer to another question that essentially Kavanaugh is safe. I mean, is the bottom line here that after 2 days of questioning, Judge Kavanaugh's chances of being confirmed have not changed?
By all indications, they haven't. I mean, when this is over, there are maybe 5 or 6 senators with whom we're going to have to just double check. It would be like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, and Joe Donnelly of Indiana, all Democrats. Susan Collins of Maine hasn't entirely said where she'd go with this. Lisa Murkowski, the Republican of Alaska. And then maybe, is there some Republican who has been critical of the president in the past, who's concerned about what's happened in the last few days, potentially want to, throw in their lot with Democrats and block this? We've got no indication that such a person exists. And so if that's the case, and now that John McCain's successor is in place as well, it looks as if he's got just enough to get confirmed by the full Senate.
So in addition to keeping an eye on these hearings, I know you've also done some reporting about 2 potential candidates to run for Senator John McCain's seat in 2020 as Democrats. What have you learned, Ed? Who are they?
So remember the memorial service in Arizona last week, a guy named Grant Woods, the former Arizona Attorney General, a former chief of staff to John McCain, has said and confirmed to us this morning that he's thinking about running for the seat in 2020 as a Democrat, not as a Republican. He's the former Republican Attorney General, but he believes that the party has basically left him and that he would either run as a Democrat or potentially as an independent, but he said running as an independent could get prohibitively expensive. There is another Democrat who's thinking about it, Ruben Gallego. He's a congressman from Phoenix, a 38-year-old former Marine, somebody who had toyed with the idea of running this time for the seat that Jeff Flake is set to leave, but instead took a pass and will wait until 2020. Remember, the governor of Arizona this week, Doug Ducey, appointed former Senator John Kyle to the other seat. He's going to fill out the term through at least the beginning of January and said he would not run for the seat himself when a special election has to be held in 2020. And whoever wins that seat in 2020 would have to run for their own term outright again in 2022 because McCain's term was set to expire in 2022. So whoever runs, and this will be part of their thinking, has to plan for raising money for a 2020 campaign and then a statewide race 2 years later. That's a lot of money in an increasingly swingy battleground state, and that'll be a consideration for everyone. But at a time when Arizona's focused right now on a competitive 2018 Senate race, telling that there are already people thinking ahead to 2020.
Really revealing. All right, Ed O'Keefe in Washington, always great to have your insight. Thank you, Ed.
Take care, Elaine.